I'm so happy to see so many faces in the crowd here at the 12th annual Festival de bande dessinée de Montréal, Montreal Comic Arts Festival. My name is François Vigneault. I'm a cartoonist, but today, as you can see, I have my FBDM hat on, and I'm going to be presenting the work of these three amazing authors in a panel long-windedly called Sympathy for the Devil, creating challenging yet captivating characters. And for reasons that will become clear in our discussion, I think these are three experts that are going to really shed light on the idea of creating problematic characters or shining a light on problematic or difficult behavior, but making the audience be really engaged with those figures at the same time. I want to mention just really briefly that all the programming here at the Hub is being presented by La Presse, and so we just would like to thank La Presse for that. And specifically, this panel is presented in conjunction with Drawn and Quarterly, a publisher here in Montreal, who is the publisher of all three of these books. So without any further ado, we're going to start doing our introductions. And I'll start here on my left with Aisha Franz, the author of Work-Life Balance, who is visiting us from where?
Berlin. Oh!
It's working.
It works.
Thank you so much for flying across the North Atlantic to be here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Joe Ollmann, the author of Fictional Father. Joe, thank you for being here. And then last but not least, we have Walter Scott, the author of the Wendy series, including, I think most recently, Wendy Master of Art. Is that right? Thank you.
Yes.
Walter, where do you live?
Montreal.
Oh, nice. I didn't know that. We've
Yep.
never met, I don't think, in person. So
Yeah, no. Nice to meet you.
I'm pleased. Thank you. You don't have to give out your specific address if you are worried about anything.
I was about to, but okay.
Yeah, no,
Good to know that I don't have
I
to.
wanted to. You seem like you were into it. I don't want anyone stalking you. So.
The first number is 8. That's all I'll give.
Narrows it down. All right. So by the way, the slideshow is going to be images from the books of these authors. I think that the representative from Drawn Quarterly is going to be mad at me because they're a little bit low res. I realized. So I may get a talking to later, but I think it's going to be okay. So I'm going to be kind of going through the images sort of randomly as we go, and usually when people are talking, I'll try and put up their images. And so, yeah, this panel is about creating difficult characters whose behavior might surpass like the limits of the likable protagonist. You know that we are always told that we're supposed to, as authors, that you're supposed to have someone that the audience can connect with and be like, oh yeah, they did the right thing or something like that. Now, my first question for all of you is, were any of you offended that you were invited to this panel? Do you consider all of your characters to be paragons of virtue and that you were just miscast here?
It was a long time coming.
I feel the same way.
Same,
I was like,
yeah.
oh, actually, I feel like they really got my book. They're awful people.
So, Aisha, why don't we start with you? Your book follows Work-Life Balance, which just came out just a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, like a month.
Nice. And so that book follows multiple characters whose stories sort of intersect with each other. Do all of the characters sort of fit into this category of sort of being like problematic or difficult or maybe cringe or something like that? Or do you have like a villain and some heroes in your story?
No, I don't think I have any hero in my story. They all have something awful about them, but then also something like kind of redeeming or lovable about, like, I don't know, some tenderness hidden there. I feel like I never have like a villain and a hero. I don't think so. They're all kind of like normal people.
Okay.
Like, you know.
And so is the lesson that normal people are themselves problematic and difficult people?
Yes, I would say so.
And
Yeah,
that's
we
the
all
end
have
of
to
our,
admit
and that's
it.
the end of our panel, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, your story kind of follows a father and son, and it's sort of about, in some ways, like broadly speaking, like the ways that the kind of unlikable qualities of the father can be passed on to the son, sometimes knowingly and sometimes unknowingly. do you have a? Do you consider them to be sort of like a duopoly, like a binary, or are they like one and the same, where they made from the same mold, the father and son?
I don't know. I find that the qualities in people that annoy me when I examine them, those are my own flaws. So that's what I think is the son character in the book is angry about the father for all these things, but he is doing similar things. So yeah, I agree. I just think neat characters are uninteresting, and I've never met any in life. Like everyone is flawed, and I just think like Tom Spurgeon once wrote about my books, and he said that I just it's a mess and everything, but at the end you allow a possibility of something good happening, and that's how I like to end all of my stories. Like not ever neat, but a possibility of something. So you allow a glimpse of their humanity. I think like Kate Beaton's book Ducks, which is an incredible book, and it has even the villains in the book who are creating this toxic work environment that she exists in. She shows their humanity. She shows them longing for this place that they are from and they're away from, and allows them humanity. They're still dicks, but they're humans and they have feelings, and like I think it's just interesting to explore that. Yeah.
Just a reminder, this panel is brought to you by Drawn and Quarterly, the publisher of Ducks. I'm just teasing. You did a good job. That was good.
That was random. I'm sorry.
No, you earned your $10. It was perfect. Walter, you followed your character Wendy through like multiple iterations. Number one, what do you feel like are her sort of difficult qualities, if you were to describe them as a character? And number two, is she changing over time?
She's not like an outright dick to anybody. I think most of her difficult qualities are the way that she sort of just gets in her own way, which in the beginnings of the book had a lot to do with her not really knowing like how to channel her ambition or her desire. So I suppose that like the way that she's problematic is not in the way that I think we think of like a problematic person, which is often like them being sort of harmful. I think in her case, it's only harmful to herself. And I have someone in my life who's also an artist who, when I first started making Wendy, they said, she's so weak. She's such a pushover. And I was like, okay. And they have an art practice themselves, and they said, like, when I make a character, I want them to be awesome at the beginning, I want them to be awesome in the middle, and I want them to be awesome at the end. And I was like, that's why your work is so boring. I didn't say that. I said it inside. I'm allowed to have an opinion. But it was good because I kind of opened the conversation and we kind of got somewhere where I was like, well, then where's the room for growth in the story if you don't start from somewhere that isn't optimal? You know? Right. Like a character has to go somewhere, and we have to see ourselves in that journey as well. Because at the very least, it gives us hope that like, oh, this fucked up person figured out something even for like half a second. Like maybe I can also figure that out or not.
Right, it's very Oscar Wilde, right? Like it's we're all like in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars, kind of thing. You have that moment where you imagine the world will be better or something. Yeah,
I feel like his other quote resonates with me more. Like there's no good or evil, there's just good and bad taste. But I feel like that's for another panel.
Unless it's a sin to have bad taste.
Well, the good and bad taste, I guess, of what you do. Anyway, I don't know. Let's put a pin on that thread.
For a bit later, maybe I'll come back.
Yeah.
I like what you said too about the way that the character is getting in her own way, and I feel that is such a human thing, and that's happening to so many of us in our daily lives. We can see that, and I think that might be part of why we're attracted to characters who have difficulties, characters whose stresses kind of relate back to us. But then there's also the question of behavior too, because all of the characters in all of your books, they're not just internally, self-sabotaging or something like that. That something on the entire inside of their psyche is kind of moving outwards as well. And I guess my talk of psyche, Aisha, that makes me think about your book, where there's a psychiatrist who is sort of central to the entire book. Can you explain a little bit about why you had psychotherapy in the center of your book in some ways?
Well, how the character came up in the first place was that I took my main character from my previous book before that one, Shit is Real, after I finished the book and stuff. So I felt like the main character, she really needs to go to therapy. Like, I feel like that's not done yet,
You had put her through the ringer.
Yeah, I had put her through the ringer. There was some sort of resolution, but not really. Like, it was a very kind of like superficial one. So that's how I came up with the therapist. And somehow the therapist kind of like stayed with me for a long time, because I realized that so the therapist in the book is a character that's very like non-engaged and not interested in her patients, like maybe even like supernatural a little bit. So it's like just kind of like provides the space for these people to go to her practice and kind of like deal with their own problems and flaws and whatever. And I like that she serves like some sort of like, she's some sort of tool for me to look at these characters. Like, I look at the characters through her glasses in a way, because it helps me to get some distance from them, but also like laugh a little bit about them. Like, I mean, I'm also kind of awful as an author, because I'm like making a story with characters that are kind of like not doing so great, but then at the same time I'm like laughing at them because I'm laughing at myself. So it's like turning itself around many times. So yeah, because as you said, like, we all have our flaws, and I feel like people like us who make stories, we make stories in the first place to somehow understand what's going on and like kind of deal with these flaws that we carry around. So we create these characters that somehow I'm very bad at reflecting my own shit. So putting it into characters that are not me really helps, to look at it and understand and be like, oh yeah, maybe I got to work on this, a little bit. So the therapist is like kind of a placeholder for that, or a medium, you could say. Yeah.
Joe, in your book, it really feels like the son is working through quote unquote daddy issues, like in a very direct and real way. And I'm not going to pick on you. I'll ask this of everybody, but like, does that reflect any kind of things that were going on in your own life that you brought? I know you talked about a father figure panel already, so we won't lay on it too much. But what Aisha was telling me about telling us about therapy and working through issues and things like that, that makes me wonder. It felt when I was reading Fictional Father that the child is working through issues with the father, and I was wondering if the father of the father, like the author, is working through issues also.
Yeah, not really. Like my
dad
and I got along good, so it was like totally fiction. But I didn't want people to think that it was me like projecting as the terrible father and the thing. So I got my kid to put a blurb on the back of the book that says, "Don't worry, my father's not really like this." So he hasn't even read the book. He doesn't read my work, but anyway, he did that. But no, my dad and I got along good, but we didn't get along good when I was a teenager.
Okay.
Like, my teenage fantasy was to have a fist fight with my dad. I was going to probably have a fist fight and then leave home. But then in later life, after I left home, we were like, we understood each other better, and like I got along great with him. So maybe I'm projecting like old stuff unresolved old stuff. Sounds like I need to go to therapy, but no, I don't have any dad issues really. But it was just interesting to me. But what was more interesting was like the comics history, and then when I started doing the idea of the fictional cartoonist doing a father and son strip, then all these cartoonists started telling me about Dennis the Menace and Hank Ketchum and his son, and that I worked that into the story because it was super interesting. So yeah, to me anyway.
Right. So you just were following the inspiration, and then you ended up in it was kind of like a vein. You found like a vein while you were mining, and then you were like, okay, we'll follow this to a certain degree.
Yeah, and then it just became more about the son's love of comics and comics history, and that's more like my thing there. Like, because whenever I talk about comics, I'm so emotional. I start crying. I've cried at comics festivals so many times. I'm a psycho. I do need therapy, guys. But in a good way. I need therapy because I love comics too much. That's it.
We didn't want to tell you, but this is actually an intervention.
Oh my
We've
God.
staged the whole festival and this whole event just for you.
Thanks, everybody.
We're here and we love you, Joe. It's okay.
I gotta go.
Walter, hold him down, please. Walter, you have a master's in art, right?
Yes.
So then, and Wendy goes through this process of getting her master's of art. How? I'm sure that some things must be inspired by life and experiences, and many other things must be completely fictional. Like, how do you navigate the drawing inspiration from life versus directing the characters where you want them to go?
Well, someone I went to grad school with unfollowed me on Instagram before the book got published because she didn't like being my roommate. But if she hadn't unfollowed me then, after reading the book, she probably would have unfollowed me anyway. Because I think she is maybe one of the people that might have seen herself in the book.
Okay.
But the thing about writing a book about grad school is that, like, it's not really about anybody. Like, in grad school, people who are going to school with each other might end up also having sex and, like, try to keep it a secret from everyone else. That's not, like, specific to anyone. And I wasn't trying to expose anyone in my grad school for doing this or that or the other thing. It was just a phenomenon I witnessed and came up with characters that were, like, in and around the people that I was in grad school with, but, like, I was fully prepared for the fallout from that. But there really wasn't any, Like, maybe a little bit. But, like, I would say that, like, that's the thing that I have to navigate often is maybe other people being, feeling like they've been, I don't know, used or exposed or
you're mocking them.
Or yeah, sure, yeah. And,
But that's it's interesting because it's them seeing themselves in these characters. Like, that's kind of revealing about them.
Compliment. It feels like a compliment in a way, even though they're upset.
But people will always see themselves, like in my characters, even though I didn't think of them the slightest, But there's always like, there's kind of like almost like a fetish about it. Like they want to be featured, and kind of they want to be not featured in the best way, Like they read the book and they're like, oh, like that's me, right? And I'm like,
or I've gotten like, oh, like that's my friend, right? Carol or whatever. I'm like, well, I've never met your friend Carol in my life, so no, it's not. And then it's like, yeah, it is. Like, no, I'm telling you, it isn't.
It's sort of like narcissistic, masochistic.
Yes, masochistic,
projection.
definitely.
We're gonna diagnose the whole audience one at a time. Something that is interesting through all of these books, especially as I was reading them in context with each other, is that not only is it about people whose personalities can be grating or who can not be doing exactly the right thing at every moment, but it's also about artists. Like it happens to be the art and art practices are a through line through all of these, which then of course reflects back on y'all who are creators. What inspired you to include art practice in this particular storyline? Maybe Aisha, we can start with you.
Yeah, so there's one of the characters, Anita, who makes pottery, but actually went to art school and studied sculpture, but just didn't make it as, a big time fine artist. And that's how she sees herself. So she always kind of still has this idea in the back of her mind that this like bigger idea of art, that's like something that that she still dreams about. It as something looming there. So she sees herself, she's just making like pottery, and making a living out of it, but she seems unfulfilled and has to. So it's a little bit about, I guess, a lot of the similarities to making comics versus, I don't know if it's similar in North America, but in Germany, it's still always considered like lower art or not art at all. And it's like, I don't care. Like, it's comics, right? But there's always kind of this identity crisis when you try to engage with other creative people, and like you're like always like, oh yeah, but art, that's something up there, like high up in the clouds, and I'm never going to reach it because I'm just making comics. Or that's what, not always what I think, but what gets reproduced from the outside. So these are like the questions, and I wanted to make it like kind of a topic in the book with that character, kind of asking herself these things and going to therapy for that.
And she's would you call her maybe the most sympathetic character in the book, or do you not have big favorites of your children?
I don't know if I have big favorites, honestly. She's not like the most complex, I would say, but that's maybe because she's so close to me.
Joe, for you, comics are written all through fictional father. Like they're part of the DNA of the book, and you've talked a little bit about that. But do you feel that there's something in the art form that sort of brings out bad behavior or negative energy or anything like that? Because there is a tradition in the medium of bad boy characters or like misanthropy and things like that. Do you feel that that's at all connected with the medium, or maybe the place the medium has in our society, or anything like that?
I don't know. I think bad boy behavior wouldn't be accepted anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like there might have been in the past, but it's a different field of creators in comics, and there's more people interested in it. So it's bound to be more inclusive and more representative of this makeup of society. So bad boy behavior would not go over well. I don't think it would be tolerated. We see that happening sometime, and people get shut down. But I just think maybe talking about art practices and that, like the masochistic work ethic of comics that's celebrated. Like you'll have artists that in Japan, manga artists that collapse at the drawing table or have damaged themselves like from working so hard. And I used to be that kind of guy. And the father in the thing, he does not handle his family life well because he's just working and shutting the. And I mean, before COVID happened, I would work till 1, 2 in the morning every day, all night. Just stop for making dinner and hang out with the family, and then just work all night. But then on COVID, I discovered that I like to get stoned and listen to records and read comics. So that's my new work ethic. I stop at 10 o'clock at night, and I'm just like reading comics and eating chips.
10 o'clock at night. What a slacker.
Yeah, I know. I'm a lazy, and my work ethic is gone. I don't get anything done. But I'm happier, and I'm like, I'm more chill. And, the manga artists would frown upon this behavior. But I think I would suggest it to them. Try, chilling out a little more. It's not worth it. Pascal Girard once said to me, he goes, I don't care, Joe. It's just comics. And I'm like, that to me, like, is really... Like people in comics, it's so weird, this world, like we're all scrabbling to have a position in comics. And it's like, it doesn't matter. It's just comics. It's not important. Our position is not important. It's a miracle that you are in it at all. Like when you go to Angoulême and the festival there and you see a sea in these tents that are bigger than airplane hangars and there's 10 million books and they all look great. And the fact that my bloody books get published, it's a miracle. I'm shaking my head and like so grateful. Like, so as I get older, I have less bad boy behavior and more like good boy behavior. I'm just like, I'm grateful. I feel so happy to be part of this world of comics. Every time I get invited to a festival, it's like a miracle. They sent me here on a train. Who would have imagined a farm boy like me would be on a train going to Montreal?
Golly.
Golly, indeed. So, yeah, so I just feel lucky and happy to be part of it. I don't know if that answered the question.
It answered a question.
Okay.
So that's all that I ask, and I appreciate it.
A friend of mine always says, like, no one forced you to make comics, right? I'm like, oh, that's something I like to remember every once in a while.
Walter, in your work, there's a lot there. There's actually this kind of tension that Aisha is mentioning about the like high-low, like all of your different characters. They feel like they're sorting out sort of, at least it felt to me that they're sorting out a hierarchy within their group or something like that. And there's sort of like an imposter syndrome a couple of times where people are like, oh, what am I doing with my things? And at times it felt like that fear was driving people to, I don't know, to harm themselves. There's like a lot of self-abuse, kind of like drug and alcohol abuse and things like that. Do you feel like that's an engine for sort of behavior that we might recognize as difficult or things that we wouldn't call ideal?
Okay, so this feels related, but people would ask me, like, how are you able to write like a woman character so well? And I'm like, well, I just make her act like a fucked up male artist, like who like the myth of the male genius or whatever, but like just make Wendy just as self-obsessed as like a man might be, but like the character is a woman. And it's like, well, how do you write women so well? It's like, because everyone is self-obsessed in the same way. So that's one answer to a question that nobody asked. But I guess in the way that like drugs and alcohol are related is like she's just doing what bad boys in comics have been doing in all of these like comics for decades, like being self-doubting and like masturbating and like drinking and like what's wrong with me? But like I suppose in some way it like gets remade in the sense that like there's a different gender doing it, and it sort of exposes it for what it is, which is just another way that like a person is self-doubtful, maybe in a way that we all share. Is there like a follow-up to that?
Well, no, I found that totally fascinating and interesting, and I also find it interesting how revolutionary small little changes can be. You know, like there's like a sort of straitjacket of like behaviors that are associated with certain people, certain genders, or things like that. And then it's really interesting that in art, such a simple change can then have like cascading, ongoing changes that then happen in like the way that people are perceiving you as an artist, the way that people are perceiving her personality. And they might be judging her in a different way than they would judge if the character was a man, if I'm sure.
Yeah. There's a whole minefield of identity politics around like authorship and the work itself and who is making what. And like for me to be able to have a whole bunch of different kinds of characters inhabiting so many different kinds of identities in this fictional world and have them respond and interact to each other is a way for me to think out loud about the way I think about the different kinds of power dynamics we have to navigate every day, and create these scenarios where I literally am just like making them happen on the page and seeing how they unfold. And what time is it? Oh, okay. It's an exercise for me in thinking about these like societal dynamics, right? And taking a risk and just putting them out there and seeing if people respond to that or see themselves in it or are challenged also.
Right, I find that fascinating, and I like the idea that the multiple characters are relaying different aspects of the personality. It's almost like they're little tiny pieces of the psyche, and like so then maybe we see ourselves in this person at this moment, or this is problematic, but we also maybe have sympathy for a character like Wendy because we see ourselves so much in her, or it's a part of ourselves.
Well, I think to expand on that a little, I think about the different sort of prisms of my like purported identity, and I see how each of the main characters inhabit each of those in a very specific way, like Winona, the sort of the indigenous character, and then Screamo, the like gay hedonist drug addict, sex addict, and then Wendy, who has these ambitions for a legitimate art career. And to be able to have those different facets of the psyche respond to each other is a way for me to think through these things that I may compartmentalize in myself daily. So yeah.
It's like one of those Pixar movies, but with sex and drugs.
Well, ideally, Wendy becomes a Pixar movie. Yes, that's my goal.
I find it fascinating. I didn't necessarily anticipate it, but I feel like we're seeing how these characters are part of a process of like a therapeutic process almost, and a way of understanding like the human condition. Like kind of writ large, or some variant of that statement.
That's what I think it's like. It's like a problematic character. You try and get into their head and think what made them like that, and just give little glimpses of that. So it's almost like forensics, like figuring out what makes people how they are, and that's kind of.
And sometimes you need to have characters have these kinds of like subjectivities or opinions, because you need to like write them to see how other characters might respond as well. Like you can't necessarily write comics where every character is like ordering the same thing on the menu, right? Like I'll also have the spaghetti. That sounds good. I'll also have that. And then the end.
But then also I feel like, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but
You can cut me off anytime, no problem.
I feel like comics offer such a perfect space for that, because there is to a degree you can't take comics, you can't read them too literal. Like I feel like we live in a time where a lot of stuff is consumed and understood in a very literal way. And I feel like comics, because there's so many layers of abstraction, like you can really go deep with those characters and make them problematic. But there is so much abstraction, so much detail that kind of, I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
I think
well.
it's also, to add to that point, like the like rate of absorption of a comic. Like I think that like there's a really like things catch on fire and burn out very quickly on the internet. Say like people's opinions or whatever. Like I'm surprised people aren't left with ashes on their fingers after going on Instagram. It's such a combustible space, but. And I feel like I've often had people who are very like, we need to know how you feel about this specific thing. And it's like, well, I have a slower process in the way I process things happening in the world. And if you want to know how I feel about something, you're going to have to wait until my next book comes out.
Walter, I think that brings up a point that I think is really interesting, which is the concept of didacticism, or like modeling behaviors and things like that. And maybe this is just me, but I feel that in culture right now and in the arts, the narrative arts, there's a real desire on a lot of people's part in the audience to be told correct behavior, or be told have everything modeled, and like have a character be like, and I did this correctly, and I did this correctly, and then there was a good result. And I think that all three of your work is like really flying in the face of that. You're showing not only like Girls Gone Wild and bad behavior, or evil daddies or whatever, but you're also showing that
sounds hot, evil daddies.
Yeah. Hashtag evil daddies. But you're also showing that there is not really answers either, right? Like all of your stories are left with I think that the audience is left with more questions than the answers by the time they get to the end. What do you think about that, Aisha?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I would just hope someone would serve me an answer after reading my book. Like, here, like, oh, I read your book. I'm a therapist. You need to come see me, or something like that. No, but of course, I mean, as what like we were saying in the beginning, I mean, it's very much like us kind of reflecting or projecting ourselves onto these characters, and in the end, there's more questions than answers. But I think that's a good thing, because otherwise, I don't know. I wouldn't know if it. I don't know if it would be a good story then, and yeah, I don't know. That's it. That's what.
I think you have to give an ending that is satisfying, that feels like an ending, but it shouldn't be neat, because nothing is ever neat in life. And if you want any kind of reality, you can't make it too neat. My stuff is always like open-ended and vague. And like my daughter made this comic mocking my work, and it says, I'm sad. I have hate. Nothing is technically resolved. And she goes, that's your work. That's all of your work. And I'm like, thank you. And it's true. But like that was kind of a compliment. It was a nice encapsulation of what I do. But I think neat endings, I don't know. They just ring false to me. They're too...
Yeah, you can't answer the question for anybody else either. Like, you don't want to just present your own perspective. You want to leave it open, because everybody has their own story. The readers too.
I know. Sorry. No. There's a craving from audiences for a neat ending, but I don't think it's good for them. So I try and not.
It's a different kind of didacticism that you have. You like, take your medicine.
Yes, drink it. It's good for you.
Well, yeah, no, it's true. I think, well, there's a lot of fear in the world. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of people, we don't really feel like we're represented, or our pain is being listened to, I think. And so something, like an Instagram swipe through of information, that is there to resolve or be done with an issue. Here's the final sort of like a packet of info so that we can all be on the same page about something. I do think that I think people often seek that from art as well. They want the art to like be definitive about how an issue should be resolved, so we can all move on and be done with it and heal. But unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, I think the role of art and the role of the artist is to remain unfinished, because to make art is a continual process of discovering. And if you're out there to try to like find the ending, then you're kind of done being an artist, right? Unfortunately, I think that like encountering the work of an artist, which is to be unfinished, creates a discomfort and an unfinishedness in you. And so I think that's uncomfortable, but I think it could also be very productive, because like we were talking about today, it's the possibility to open up more questions, which I think are more important than answers.
That's very eloquent.
Thank you.
I love the group therapy. We're going to have everything resolved, and everything's going to be fine at the end of this, I think. Well, we've talked about a lot of serious issues so far, but actually something that the audience might not realize if they haven't encountered your work is that all three of these books are just laugh out loud funny. They're all comedies. They're dark sometimes, but they're all really funny. Are you, as comic writers, comic in the sense of comedic writers, what about difficulty or cringe moments or people who are making like bad decisions? Like, how are you minding the comedy in that? Is that just the most natural thing in the world, or is there something like a process to kind of get there?
For me, it just comes naturally, because like even in your darkest moments in life, I think in like the movie The Royal Tenenbaums, when Bill Murray's character, his wife leaves him, he finds out she's been cheating on him, and he goes, well, I feel like dying. And then he picks up a cookie, and then he puts it down because he doesn't want people to see that he's eating a cookie, that he's happy enough to eat a cookie. He wants to be completely depressed. I just find he's so completely heartbroken, but that moment is very funny to me. So I just think no matter what's happening, even in the darkest moments of your life, there's hilarious things happening constantly. So I just think you have to leaven the depressing stuff with humor, or else it's intolerable. It's a slog to get through. So to me, it just comes naturally. even in the most serious subjects I've ever covered, I always put jokes in.
That's your personal response on a personal level, and then that extends to your work as a creator.
Yeah, like I tell jokes at funerals and stuff. No, I don't do that. But I mean, you know, like I think it's natural. It's a human instinct to lighten things up with laughter. So
for me, I think so. I have a very long. How do you call it? Do you have that saying here? Like of a like bomb or something.
A fuse.
A fuse. I have a. I don't know if it fits with the same, but a long fuse, like getting like. So I don't like. I'm not good in responding to jokes in real life or making jokes in real life. Like you can fool me all the time, and I just fall for it. I'm like so like, oh yeah, here we go. Oh, it was a joke, but so. For me, for telling jokes, I like need this dedication and this time, like in a comic, to actually get there. Like it gives me the right space to dissect something and understand the comedy in it. So I can't. I'm bad to being funny in the moment, but like I really need to be funny. And it's also like, I mean, working on a book, it's like it's so annoying. It's so much work. And it also kind of helps through the process if you can laugh at something like, oh, like you get excited about a moment because it's so funny, you know, and you really want to draw it. So I guess, yeah.
So for you need to observe something and let it simmer. You'll see something happen and you'll be like,
I wouldn't even...
there's something. Well, when you see something, are you like, this is great material. This is gold right here.
Usually not. It's like after the fact. It takes me way too long to realize it. Yeah.
Walter, it feels like when you were like in like crit sessions or whatever in grad school, it seems like you must have been like, this is all just wonderful material. But is that a false thing? Were you more like completely in the moment and you were like feeling the other feelings that one might feel in those situations?
Well, number one, I was literally there to get an education about art, but I think it was my professors who knew that I made Wendy. They had already had this presupposition that I was just there for the material. And I was like, no, I'm literally here to learn about art. Like, so I feel like I was cheated out of an education a little bit because they already had their own ideas about like what I was doing there. And of course I used everything for material, but like I was also like, I don't know, I'm here to like learn how to be an artist too. But my process for humor is like with Wendy, the like core DNA of it was like I was just out here to make myself laugh. Mm-hmm. And now when I'm drawing, if I'm making myself laugh, I know that it's working because I'm laughing. So someone else might. I think that Wendy, this is like full disclosure, I feel like Wendy has like turned more from like puking and drinking gags to like a soft melodrama. So like my way that I incorporate humor into it has like shifted slightly. So I think that like after the next book, I might take a break and like return to like gags and like stories that aren't Wendy related that just like are immediately funny and maybe even a little bit immature again. Because I kind of miss that like one-to-one of like drawing something stupid and it's almost like when you're 10 and you draw someone shitting on someone's face. I miss that. And like Wendy came from that and then became this like sprawling saga. So I think it's time to like go back to my immature roots again and see like what comes out of that pot of dirt.
Okay. Yeah, it's not getting too dark. That's not the right term for it, but it's getting dark enough where you're like, you miss the light of what was happening before in both.
Yeah, it's gone from like punk to like adult contemporary. Mm-hmm. I hope this doesn't affect book sales, but this is how I feel about Wendy. Like she's pushing 40 soon, and so I mean, and so am I. So it might be time for me if I want to access that like nucleus of humor again. It might have to be from another project that's a bit more visceral, a bit more weird.
You can let her go off into the distance, but you'll loop her back in.
We'll see her again in 10 years when she's an exhausted tenured art professor or something. Divorced.
So what you're saying too is interesting because there's this concept of like the evolution of the character over time. for any of you, were there any times when you were following where the character was leading you or directing them, and they went too far? Like, and it could be too far in the sense that they said something that was too much, where you're like, I don't want to put this on the page. They went too dark, or or you simply you didn't think the audience was going to follow, or maybe you were uncomfortable with it. Are there any times when your characters pushed you? Would you talk to us about those times? And I don't know. We'll go from there.
I mean, yeah, I think I had that a little bit with one of the characters, Sandra. Like, initially I had drawn... So she is...
This is her, yeah?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the kind of more intense scenes in the book. So she works in a startup, but she, like, kind of... yeah, how would you say it in English? Like, right term, what she does to that guy. It's like sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment and like beyond kind of a little bit.
Yeah, it's like sexual harassment a little more. It's like, so again, a little bit like the twisted kind of gender roles a little bit. And I had much more explicit scenes, actually, because, we were talking earlier also about... the process and creating characters and stuff. Like I feel like it's also like I'm generally like a very like I believe in the good in people. I'm like nice in real life, but so comics really gives me that space to really, go nuts and kind of let all these like dark sides of myself that are not like literally like that, but there is some, to let it out. And I feel like sometimes it spills over. So I was like kind of, no, I love people. I also love men. I'm married to one, but I feel like a lot of like the tension of like, yeah, she should really like show him, he's, like kind of went into that, and it was too much because it is still like abuse in a way, like if you think about it in a different context. So, and I also think it's much more valuable to retreat a little bit and leave more to the imagination. Like, so I'm not actually showing it, I'm just insinuating it. And there's a pattern in there that we all recognize and we can all kind of, but definitely I had to delete a few scenes. Yeah,
even these pages here that I pulled out, like I feel like there's a scene that happens before this that's hinted at, and then you don't show it, and it's left to the imagination, which is maybe a way of actually like pushing the reader even further. You make the reader an accomplice in some ways with what you're depicting. They're pulling something dark out of their mind the way you're pulling something dark out of society, your own intentions and things like that.
Yeah.
Joe, did you ever feel like you had to pull back from anywhere in the story?
Well, I was raised in this crazy religion called Catholicism. And
I've heard about this.
Yeah.
It's like a cult, right?
Yeah. So I have a lot of like, I'm like really suppressed, so I censor myself before I would like go too far. So my characters don't, I would censor them. Yeah. I'm careful about that. I would rather like hint at things than show them. It's interesting because you can write about things like, say, in a novel that you can get away with, whereas in a visual form, it doesn't fly. In a film, it doesn't fly. So I'm just aware of that. I don't know. There's nothing I would not discuss in a comic or do. I think you can always do it in a way that's not. It's difficult. You were writing a villainous character, say they're a racist character. How much voice do you give to that before you're actually just,
platforming or whatever?
Yes. So it's a tricky balance of that kind of thing. So I'm just kind of cautious of it. I don't want to offend people, So
I always find that fascinating, that issue with comics as a visual medium, where people think they get it right away because they see it and they're like, okay, I saw it, I understand the whole thing. Whereas all of you are like creating like characters who you might see a surface and you might be like, oh, this is superficially disturbing or whatever. But then, I think all of you are wanting to like dig in a little bit deeper and be like, why? Like, what is the psychology? What is the history? What are the things? Where's this character been? And also, where are they going? Walter, did you ever have a moment where you were like, okay, or like either you don't want to go somewhere or that you don't want to inflict something on one of your characters? Because I also get the sense that you really love a lot of your characters too.
Yeah, I love all of them. It's not fun to write a character that you hate, because then you just pile shit on them. I've definitely censored myself in the past. I didn't want to write bad things because I didn't want people to think I'm a bad person. But ultimately, everyone's going to make their own decisions. If someone thinks they're a bad person, they want to think you're a bad person, they just will. As an artist, I guess I can't really afford to do that, right? And I realize now in the next book that I'm writing, I have this entirely this subplot that features Winona and her mother, and they talk about their indigenous identity.
I was about to ask, Winona's the native character in the book, right?
Yeah, and it's based I'm from Ganawage, so there's conversations that I have with other indigenous people that are deeply controversial, where I'm this is a really risky thing to put on the page, but I put it there for this book, and I'm going to publish it because I kind of can't afford not to do it, I think it's important to be able to read things that are uncomfortable, and it makes everything richer and I guess a little riskier in a good way.
Well, I think that really speaks to what all of you are doing, and what a lot of creators are doing is they're examining these dark parts of the human condition, that we're all stuck in this boat, we're all going through it. There's no end to it. It's just going to keep on rolling. There's not a tidy conclusion, but it can be very interesting, enlightening, and also very funny to examine those kind of things in a little bit of more detail.
But I feel like you still have to be. And I think we all are to a degree aware from which perspective you're telling these things. You can't. You have to be very aware.
You mean your identity as a creator?
No, if you create problematic characters, you have to know what perspective you're taking, or I would not be able to create any problematic character that wouldn't Sandra couldn't have been drawn by a man, I don't think, or in this way. I don't, or there's a few really nuances that you have to be aware as a writer to really make them work, because it matters in the end. Where you what your background is, what you want to say.
Right, because you're the storyteller, and even if it's another character, in the way that the characters are different parts of your mind, parts of your existence, there has to be something, there has to be a there somewhere. Yeah. Well, I was going to say that I thought that maybe some audience members might have some questions, and if they do, we have a microphone right up in the front. Is anyone interested in asking questions? Otherwise, I can always ask more, but have some bright thoughts? No? Yes? No?
I like
Yes.
answering. I like answering questions.
Come on down. Da-da-da.
Oh, wow. Bright thoughts really put so much more pressure on the question. I was wondering, because you guys talked a lot about story, what does the visual part of comics add to problematic or cringy characters in your opinions? How does that change your characters?
Well, I like the two parents in my comic. I address that. They both have kind of wrinkled, sour faces, but he talks about the mother character who is a little more redeeming, and she has kind of a sour face, but her heart is doesn't match the exterior, and the father he smiles in photos in that, and he's kind of got this fake persona that he's this nice guy, but in reality he's just a genuine asshole. So their character designs were important. I talked about a John Callahan cartoon where it's the difference between LA and New York. So it's they show a person in New York is they're saying "fuck you," but they're thinking "have a nice day," and the person in LA is saying "have a nice day," but they're thinking "fuck you," and that was what the parents were like for me. So I put that joke in there as well. So.
I have some visual cues that, like, show the different motives. Again, similarly to what you said, like for me, a black thought bubble is like a really evil thought. So it's a way to indicate the person, or like if the word bubble is like a square, it's like very concise, kind of harsh, or like all caps. So like there's ways to like exhibit like prickly characters. I think. That's it.
Maybe to add to that, so the styles in my book vary a lot because they're very informed by the stories and the characters, and I feel like with this one, because it's like such a almost like cynical comedic story, but there's also so dark. Like I could only really do it in this my characters became more bubbly, more cartoon-like. I feel like that's the only way it can carry that through the style. Like it had to be a little bit like punchy. I don't know.
Yeah, all of you work in a cartoony register, and there's that interesting element where the audience maybe even sees more of themselves in a cartoony kind of image, and so that brings in that sympathy element of the sympathy for the devil, where they're gonna see it, and if the person's too real, it's very othered, right? And then if they're like, especially like all your characters, one that like really stands out to me is just Wendy's design. I feel like is like brings you in with her eyes and everything, and like there's something there. I like that idea too, that you're working with language. There's like a grammar of the design. Like in Joe, we have the round shape of the mother and the square shape of the father, and those are representing different things. Similarly, in Aisha's work, we have like the eyes that are there versus not there. You mentioned earlier, and I was really struck by it. You mentioned seeing the story through the eyes of the psychiatrist, who of course does not have any eyes. She has these blank circles looking in. So I find that all those visual cues there can be. It's interesting. Comics are so simple, they're so complicated at the same time, and you're really getting to something there. Thank you so much for that question.
It's hard to make them simple.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
If it was easy, everyone would do it. Do we have any other questions? Any other questions? Please come on up. We have two, so come on up, make the line.
That's okay. Okay, great. How does the translation process work in terms of different phrases used in different languages that don't really translate properly? Would you change maybe the image to like make it more resonate with that audience? Or, that's my question.
I mean, I have never thought of that, but that's kind of brilliant. Well, it's too much work, but so I was very involved in the translation process because it was actually my partner/husband who translated the book because he's an English speaker. And it was an interesting process because, of course, I mean, a lot of things don't translate, and there's not much eloquent text in my stories. It's just very simple kind of conversation. So there's a lot of idiomatic things, and some of them changed completely what they were saying. Like it almost felt wrong to me, but in the end, looking back at it, it's totally right. I mean, every translator has to go through that process, but it's just interesting for me to be so closely in it. So, but I would say we were always trying to stick to the characters, and then we would probably change context so it fits or change whatever they were saying so it fits to the concepts maybe actually that you wouldn't be able to translate in to serve the characters.
And both of you wrote your work in English, I think, but you've had them translated. But then there's also the element of cultural translation too. Do you ever feel like you're trying to get something across on the page, like be it like the exact way that like life was like in LA or Palm Springs or something in the 60s, or Walter, like you were mentioning, like these certain issues of indigenous life and culture. Do you feel like you have to, what kind of work do you feel like you have to do to reach the audience?
Well, for the indigenous stories, it's like just sort of tell them verbatim and just let the audience figure it out, right?
Absorb it.
But like actually very specifically, I translated a Wendy project from English to Japanese.
Oh, really?
And did a small print of some original Wendy's that were exclusively printed in Japan. And that was funny because like there'd be translations like, when you say gallery, do you mean museum or community center? Because those are our distinctions here. And I was like, it's more community center. Okay, great. And then like you learn a bit about like the culture, and you're like, in this kind of community center, like the children come. So is it that kind? Because then we got to change it even more specifically. And it's like, okay. And then it's like, when you say like, oh my God, fuck me, do you mean like this? And then it's like, okay, so what we would say in that emotion, it would be, I desire you, you know? So like, you learn a lot about like the like intimate life of like an entirely different language. So that was like useful for me, or like just illuminating for me, you know?
That's good. We're good. Any other questions from the audience? All right. Well, I'll just take this moment to thank our three panelists, and I'll ask for a round of applause really quick.